is our land. We won't be
Say hello and welcome to Let's Talk. I'm John Kane, and of course, I'm here with Shawnee Rice, and we are pleased to be here on a special to our broadcast. It's the second one we've had in a couple of weeks, and it feels good. It feels good to have some extra space so we can not only provide some content, but provide a little bit more time for our callers to give us some feedback. And we do get some colorful callers, and so we're expecting that today. Of course, it is International Mandela Day, National Nelson Mandela Day. This was declared back in 2009, and so we're going to try to make it a bit of a tradition here at WBAI to honor and acknowledge this day each year. Obviously Nelson Mandela is an iconic figure for human rights, especially as it relates to race issues and oppression of an indigenous people. And I'm going to put a little bit different spin on some of the things. I mean, I don't need to reiterate everything that Mandela stood for. Most people know that. But you know what? To honor Nelson Mandela, we need to do more than just praise him. We need to continue the work. We need to stay on top of some of the very ideals and principles. Now, whether you agreed with everything Nelson Mandela ever stood for, I'm not even having that debate. But what I will say is when I hear the praise that is heaped upon Nelson Mandela by people who apparently don't own mirrors, because when you hear, and I'm going to play a good 5 minute, a little over a 5 minute track of Barack Obama. They're doing a tribute. I don't know if it was the official eulogy, but he was eulogizing Nelson Mandela after he passed away. And if you haven't ever listened to this in the way that I'm going to ask you to, what I'm going to want you to do is listen to it from a native perspective, and just think about some of the things that you're going to hear Barack Obama talk about when we cue this up. I'm not going to do it right this second, but when we do that, I just want you to listen to it, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit afterwards. There are things that, and I'm not even playing the whole piece because it's 12 or 13 minutes, and I'm going to do about a 5 minute piece of it. But and again, I want to key on some of the things that not just Barack Obama, but considering how easy it is. I mean, look, today I'm wearing my Colin Kaepernick shirt. If you're not catching us on Facebook Live, I've got my number 7, but it's a fist raised number 7. It's my version of the Kaepernick shirt. And it's funny because I hear people say all the time, "Oh, that Colin Kaepernick, that Megan Rapinoe, they sure aren't any Rosa Parks or Muhammad Ali." But you know what? Those of you who are saying that, you didn't like Muhammad Ali at the time either. It's easy in retrospect to look back and praise somebody after there's been some sort of social acceptance. Do you think Rosa Parks was popular amongst white people? Come on, folks. I'm not saying that there weren't some white people who supported the civil rights movement. There clearly was, but by and large, the very people who would condemn a Megan Rapinoe or Colin Kaepernick would have been absolutely condemning of Muhammad Ali when he was opposing, because it wasn't just opposing the Vietnam War. It was opposing the whole idea of the United States imposing its will against other people, and then expecting black people to suit up and go. And I'm going to paraphrase, but the line that Ali gave was, there's no way that this black man is going to go kill the yellow man for the white man who stole land from the red man. I mean, look, that about sums it up. And he talked about who his opposers were, who his oppressors were. They certainly weren't the Viet Cong. And so, but to say those things in that era was not popular amongst white people. Frankly, it wasn't popular amongst a lot of black people. So when you look back and you say, "Oh yeah, Muhammad Ali, yeah, he was a hero." Well, okay, and I agree with that. I agree with that sentiment. But if you didn't hold that view in the 70s when he had to give up his boxing career in the prime of his life, you're probably the same people who will condemn Colin Kaepernick, and will say, "Well, yeah, he's no Muhammad Ali." Well, actually, he is a Muhammad Ali. That's exactly.
I don't understand what are they saying by he's no Muhammad Ali? What is their point? Like, he's not as good of an activist. He's not as good an athlete. What is the comparison they're trying to make?
Well, because what happens is history endears these folks. That's the whole point. It's easy for people to embrace, a Rosa Parks now, or Muhammad Ali now, because it's after the fact. See, but when you're in the throes of it, and all of a sudden you can get this pain. And so the reason I'm bringing it up today is I hear a lot of people who have nothing but tremendous praise for Nelson Mandela, who wouldn't do a goddamn thing when he was serving 27 years in prison. Who didn't speak out.
So do you think the opinions of Nelson Mandela have drastically changed?
Oh,
have
yeah.
you watched the opinions change?
Well, and during his time in prison, he obviously was successful in making his case, but no, he is very much more embraced today. And of course, there's still people who have trouble with the fact that among the people who praised him were guys like Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi and others. That's still kind of, well, we're not going to bring that up. I mean, who's the first one that Mandela called when he got out of prison from?
Wasn't it Castro?
Yeah, it was Fidel Castro. One of the first people he called was Fidel. We're not going to bring that up.
And Yasser Arafat, but who's,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So, but look, I'm going to play we're going to play this bit from. It's not a bit. It's a lot of what Obama says. Look, you can agree with it, but I want you to, when you do listen to it, I want you to listen to it as if you're a native person, and if you've heard some of the things that I've talked about, you've heard some of this, what can only be listed as kind of the incredible hypocrisy. So I want you to listen to some of that. I do want to remind people that we are going into a fund drive, and you don't have to wait till we're in fund drive to make a donation. You can call the pledge line anytime. You can call 516-620-3602. You can become a WBAI buddy. I am not likely going to do many shows during the fund drive. I'm not. Look, I'm going to say it right now. I'm not a big fundraiser. My success in fundraising has dropped off. So what I'm asking you, if you're listening to the show, especially this 2-hour special or the 2-hour special I did on 4th of July, which I thought was an excellent show, make a contribution. Become a BAI buddy in the name of Let's Talk. You make a donation of any size in the name of this program. If you want to, look, if you'd like to see us go back to 2 hours on a full-time basis, or at least do more 2-hour shows, then you're gonna have to show some support for the station and for the program. So that's what I'm asking you now. I'm not on the schedule for next week, so I'm not going to be putting a bug in your ear next week, so I'm going to do it now. I want you to support the station. I want you to support the program. So, and I'm open you to do that. Again, the pledge line is 516-620-3602. You can also go online. You can go to the donation page, the site page, which is www.give2WBAI.org, and you can make a donation. Look, they'll even tell you how you can text the donation. There's any number of ways to do it, but I'm not pitching you a premium. I'm just telling you that I'd love for you to become a WBAI buddy. And when you do that, you become part of the station. You become a listener member of the station. So I'm going to do that. All right, let's go right to, this is Barack Obama. And again, it's an incredible sight. If you haven't seen the video, you can find it. And it is a much bigger speech than what I'm playing here. But it's in the pouring rain, and the people are out there with umbrellas, and they're cheering. I mean, it looks, without trying to do a Trump embellishment, there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people there, and it's a sea of people in the rain, just hanging on every one of Obama. This was was it in Johannesburg?
It was in Johannesburg.
Yeah, it was in Johannesburg. Yeah, and this was this was the speech that he gave, eulogizing and as a tribute to Nelson Mandela. This is the last part of it. So we'll go ahead and play that.
With honesty, regardless of our station or our circumstance, we must ask, how well have I applied his lessons in my own life? It's a question I ask myself, as a man and as a president. We know that, like South Africa, the United States had to overcome centuries of racial subjugation. As was true here, it took sacrifice, the sacrifices of countless people, known and unknown, to see the dawn of a new day. Michelle and I are beneficiaries of that struggle. But in America and in South Africa and in countries all around the globe, we cannot allow our progress to cloud the fact that our work is not yet done. The struggles that follow the victory of formal equality or universal franchise may not be as filled with drama and moral clarity as those that came before, but they are no less important. For around the world today, we still see children suffering from hunger and disease. We still see rundown schools. We still see young people without prospects for the future. Around the world today, men and women are still imprisoned for their political beliefs and are still persecuted for what they look like and how they worship and who they love. That is happening today. And so we too must act on behalf of justice. We too must act on behalf of peace. There are too many people who happily embrace Madiba's legacy of racial reconciliation, but passionately resist even modest reforms that would challenge chronic poverty and growing inequality. There are too many leaders who claim solidarity with Madiba's struggle for freedom, but do not tolerate dissent from their own people. And there are too many of us on the sidelines, comfortable in complacency or cynicism, when our voices must be heard. The questions we face today, how to promote equality and justice, how to uphold freedom and human rights, how to end conflict and sectarian war, these things do not have easy answers. But there were no easy answers in front of that child born in World War I. Nelson Mandela reminds us that it always seems impossible until it is done. South Africa shows that is true. South Africa shows we can change, that we can choose a world defined not by our differences, but by our common hopes. We can choose a world defined not by conflict, but by peace and justice and opportunity. We will never see the likes of Nelson Mandela again. But let me say to the young people of Africa and the young people around the world, you too can make his life work your own. Over 30 years ago, while still a student, I learned of Nelson Mandela and the struggles taking place in this beautiful land. And it stirred something in me. It woke me up to my responsibilities, to others and to myself, and it set me on an improbable journey that finds me here today. And while I will always fall short of Madiba's example, he makes me want to be a better man. He speaks to what's best inside us. After this great liberator is laid to rest, and when we've returned to our cities and villages and rejoined our daily routines, let us search for his strength. Let us search for his largeness of spirit somewhere inside of ourselves. And when the night grows dark, when injustice weighs heavy on our hearts, when our best laid plans seem beyond our reach, let us think of Madiba and the words that brought him comfort within the four walls of his cell. It matters not how straight the gate, are charged, the punishment, the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. What a magnificent soul it was. We will miss him deeply. May God bless the memory of Nelson Mandela. May God bless the people of South Africa.
All right. So there's Barack Obama, and I'm hoping that you could hear what I hear. You know, for a couple of things. Before I even address what he said, in the I don't know the 8 minutes leading up to this, he actually compared Nelson Mandela to the founding fathers of the United States. I mean, he actually made the comparison. I mean, about him writing a constitution. Can I remind folks that the U.S. Constitution was racist as hell? I mean, the 3/5 of a man thing. I mean, do I have to reiterate the fact that women aren't even mentioned in the U.S. Constitution? That it is rife with all kinds of racism, including And look, I did a couple of weeks ago. We did the show on the Declaration of Independence. When you hear these founding fathers say things like all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and you have slaves at home. I don't mean just slaves in your home, or in Jefferson's case, in his bed.
Right.
But you have
not
them,
just Jefferson.
You have look. If you go visit Jefferson's home, was it Monticello? Is it called
Monticello?
Monticello, yeah, it's Monticello. There, you can see where the slaves kept. I mean, in fact, I saw some recent stories that talked about how accurate his record keeping was and how efficient he was at being a slaveholder. He knew to the dime how much food he had to give them to get the optimum amount of work out of them. He refined slaveholding to a science. So I cringed when I hear the black president of the United States compare Nelson Mandela to a bunch of rich white racist guys, whose main reason for declaring independence from Great Britain was because they wanted to steal more land and maintain their slaveholding. I mean, but now let's talk about what you did here. So when I hear Barack Obama talking about how he and Michelle are the beneficiaries of changes in the United States, yes, you are. But not everybody's beneficiaries of it. Many people. And when I hear him say things like, there are still places in the world where children are dying of disease and malnutrition.
Or without school, without prospect, without hope.
Yeah, all of that. You don't have to go to third world countries. You don't have to go to Africa to find those places. Because Barack Obama and 44 other presidents have ignored the plight of Native people, or have caused the plight of Native people.
Both, yeah. So
I mean, when I hear again that line, there are still places in the world where young people have no hope and prospect for the future. Go to a Native territory, any one of them. Even look, I live on what's considered a more affluent Native territory, the Sonic Nation. But 30% of the people there still live below the poverty level. And you can't go to a Native child and say, well, geez, what are you going to do? What's your future? We still tell our children, and I won't say I do personally, but in general, it is a common thread to suggest to your children, if you live on a Native territory, that in order for them to have success, they've got to leave. They've got to leave home. You've got to go to the city. You've got to go to New York. You've got to go to Los
military?
Angeles. Or worse yet, the military. Yeah. I mean, that is still something that's advocated. That's the conditioning. So when I hear somebody, look, if you're suggesting joining the military is your best hope and prospect for the future, then you have no hope and prospect for the future. Because that's not a good thing. So, and the reason I wanted to play this is because it's important that when we're celebrating the life of Nelson Mandela, we don't get caught in our own hypocrisy in praising the things that he does and then say, well, I know I need to do better. Well, I'll tell you some things you need to do better. I mean, there's plenty. It's things that I wouldn't even suggest to the current occupant of the White House. But you know what? There was a real, genuine hope that finally there was a president of the United States who would either pardon or commute Leonard Peltier's sentence. And Obama never even considered it. So as you're saying that there are people who are serving prison time for what they look like, for the things they stand for, Leonard Peltier has been in prison since 1977. It'll be 42 years this year. 42 years in prison. Nelson Mandela was in for 27, and I'm not minimizing what 27 years in prison, and I'll bet the prison conditions in South Africa were probably worse than what Leonard Peltier has experienced. Because honestly, Leonard Peltier has lived every one of the people that he was in aim with.
Outlived?
Outlived.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to call it living, but Trudell, Means, Banks, Belcourt, Robidoux, they're all gone. And Peltier still sits in a prison cell. An dying old man who still couldn't get Barack Obama, the one issuing all his praise for Nelson Mandela, to even consider a humanitarian pardon or commutation. Nothing. Now, and I want to be clear here. I will not sit here and say Peltier was an innocent man. I don't know. I don't know if he was innocent. I'm not going to sit here and praise the character and suggest that Leonard Peltier was an altar boy. I have a lot of questions about anime Aquash. I have a lot of questions about some of the conduct of some of the AIM members at that time. I won't say that I'm sitting here grieving for the two FBI agents who died. They went there looking for a fight, and they lost the fight. But what I will say is that Leonard Peltier's trial was a sham, and everybody knew it. Mm-hmm. And it's been reiterated over and over and over again. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying he didn't get a fair trial, and he's been serving 42 years on a sham of a trial. So if you're going to go to South Africa and you're going to praise somebody who strove for justice and ignore it back home. When Barack Obama, with much hype and celebration, became, I don't know if it was the first or just the very first in a long, long time, first sitting president, to go visit a quote-unquote Indian reservation. He went to Standing Rock. He went to Standing Rock and actually went to Cannonball, which is the area, just above Standing Rock, just north of Standing Rock. He went there for a Flag Day celebration. And, man, there was lots of American flags waving there in Lakota territory. Lots of flags. He gave a speech there, too, another eloquent speech, where he cited Sitting Bull. And he talked about Sitting Bull's words themselves, where he said, we need to look after our children. We need to create opportunities for our children. So what did Obama create for the Lakota? For the Sioux? What did he create? A pipeline. Probably won't say it. He created a pipeline. The Dakota Access Pipeline, that was Obama's thing, not Trump's thing. Yeah, it's operating during the Trump administration, but it was planned and designed by the Obama administration. Even as he's speaking these words about creating something for the Standing Rock Sioux, that is the only legacy that Obama, other than the visit itself, dancing with little girls and listening to the drum, waving lots of American flags. I mean, there were even a couple of regalia outfits that were red, white, and blue.
I mean,
there were.
No, I know, but
anyway.
I get he was also the only president to apologize, even though that was not like nobody knows that.
Yeah.
I mean, and on purpose, like
Yeah.
he can't do it. Like he can't go on CNN and apologize for the United States history with indigenous people. But I mean, this is like another example of what we were.
Yeah, I
all
mean,
of this
it
stuff
becomes
is.
rhetoric, and the words become hollow when you don't take the action. So anyway, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break. We'll go out with another Murray Porter song, but we're gonna come back. We got more. We're gonna play some audio from the Eric Garner rally or protest that is going on today, and as it relates to this this day, this Nelson Mandela Day. We'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane with Shawnee Rice. This is Let's Talk.
Well, someday I'll never learn. Someday I'll never learn. Well, I lit the fires and I'm the one that got burned. When I was a young man, I had money to burn. I partied every night and every penny that I earned. I bought drinks for everybody, never got one in return. Well, someday I'll never learn. Someday I'll never learn. I lit the fires and I'm the one that got burned. Sometimes I feel alone in the middle of the night, but I ain't no fool. My mama raised me right, but I know, baby, I know you ain't treating me right. Found me a woman, but my love she's spurned.
Tell you, someday I'll never learn. I love the song because of the irony of it, and what plays out with what we're talking about here is in spite of the rhetoric, in spite of the good words. I'm not saying nothing changes, but for some people, nothing changes. The injustices remain. The oppression remains. The corruption, and corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. So when we're just kind of going through right now, there's a whole lot of things happening in different places. In Hawaii, there are major protests going on because the scientific community and the state of Hawaii and the United States is really pushing to put this huge telescope on the top of Mauna Kea, the sacred mountain of the Kanaka Maoli and the Hawaiian people, and so the protests are kind of beginning in earnest, and there are people that want to stop it. They're going to block it. They're going to do whatever they can to keep this thing from happening, and so the arrests are beginning. So there's Hawaii, there's Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is in major disarray, stemming all the way back to the completely inadequate response to Hurricane Maria. I mean, it's you can't. I'm not attributing all of the problems. Puerto Rico has had problems, since colonization. Since the United States took ownership of it from Spain in the Spanish-American War. I mean, it has been exploited by the wealthy elite of the United States. It has been a tropical playground for for the wealthy people. It's also been a place for the military to practice, and life for Puerto Rico has been completely upended. It is a U.S. territory, and the crazy part is, it is still treated as if it's another country. And I gotta bring some of this stuff up because beyond the go back to where you came from stuff from Trump, even as I'm listening to the reporting on this thing back home in Buffalo, I mean, one of the Congressman Rivera from Buffalo did a speech outside one of the the major sites in the city of Buffalo, and as the NPR station was covering this, they said he was flanked by immigrants from Somalia and Puerto Rico. I'm sorry. Can I say this just one more time? Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. If you come from Puerto Rico to New York City or any place else, you're not an immigrant. I have trouble with the word anyway, but I mean, I go back to Sonia Sotomayor. Remember when she was nominated for NPR again, the major NPR station says, "Oh yeah, Sonia Sotomayor, she's the daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants." No, she's not. She, her parents may be from Puerto Rico, but that doesn't mean they're immigrants. That's like saying Bernie Sanders is an immigrant from Vermont. Well, no, he was an immigrant from Brooklyn to Vermont, I guess. I don't know. However you want to put it. No, it's amazing that the rhetoric is still there. There's still a way to cast people as the others. And I'm not even sure how much I'll even address the whole go back, to the, where you came from. I don't know.
I mean, but the immigrant thing is a very tricky concept because it's
where do you draw the line, right?
It's like who
are the good immigrants?
Who's hurling? Well, it's who's hurling the word immigrant at you with what intention? Because I guess like technically, because they're U.S. citizens, that they're not considered immigrants. But how are they treated, and what's the reality of moving from Puerto Rico to the United States and having culture and language barriers? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it makes sense if I feel like if a Puerto Rican person, especially first generations, they can identify as being an immigrant. They can in that sense. But for a politician to call people who are moving here from Puerto Rico immigrants,
but the definition of immigrant means that you come from another country,
right? But I'm saying there's
You're saying there's another culture.
It is another culture, another language.
Yeah,
but I'm saying like it's who gets to define that. As a person, you can say this is my experience is that of an immigrant. But as a politician, to be like to not recognize that it's a different country, that's where it gets a bit. It's hard to.
Well, and of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention when I'm listening to Obama, although this wasn't. Well, I can't even say this, but as he's talking about people being locked up for who they are and what they look like, I'm envisioning kids in cages, and and we can get into a whole debate on how much family separation took place during the Obama administration. There was some, so let's not pretend there wasn't. Okay, I mean, so did it become the hallmark of immigration policy the way Trump has made it? No, but let's not pretend. I mean, Obama deported people at a very, very high rate, higher than any other president before him.
Right, he had the highest rate of deportation.
Yeah, and the only reason Trump hasn't surpassed it is because he's a bumbling incompetent. I mean,
because
he's
proud of it.
Yeah.
He's proud of it, I guess.
So there's that, and of course here in New York we have what is supposed to be an 11-day protest, and why stop at 11 days? I mean, the Justice Department came down in their determination that they could not prosecute or say that Officer Pantaleo, is that his name? Pantaleo. Committed a crime.
Wild.
He killed Eric Garner. He killed him, and they're saying they can't prosecute him because they can't establish intent. look, he didn't just have his arm around his neck. He had his forearm on the throat. Look, I know what a headlock is, and I know how you can grab. There are ways that you can put somebody in a headlock and not strangle them. That's not what Pantaleo did. And look, they can tell all kinds of stories about how he was struggling to to keep him to arrest him. But I had to ask Reggie before the show. I mean, one of the stories that never gets brought up is I understand what they claim to be arresting him for, but did they take cigarettes from him? They claimed that he was selling Lucy's, which are loose cigarettes, and supposedly one of those stores
in the past.
In the past. And frankly, they have taken money from him through the civil forfeiture process that allows you to just take money from somebody and never have to account for it. So they've taken thousands of dollars from Eric Garner and his family. But in this instance, on this day, when the cops showed up with quite a group, he wasn't selling cigarettes. He didn't have cigarettes on him. There's nobody who's ever said, well, we went to arrest him and we confiscated, cartons or cases. No, there's no mention of either money or illicit controlled substances in the form of tobacco. All they did was kill him. All they did was kill him. And of course, the local prosecutor said, no, we can't bring a charge. And now and who knew? William Barr, can you imagine that? A Trump appointee, says, oh no, we're not going to prosecute a cop. And and I brought it up, folks. I brought it up 2 weeks ago when I was going through the Declaration of Independence. Do you remember me noting the one part that Jefferson claimed that King George was responsible for creating mock trials? Mock trials to allow people, their soldiers, police officers, soldiers, what's the difference, who killed people to be cleared. That's what Jefferson accused King George of. Holding mock trials to clear people of murder. Well, what the hell do you think happened with Eric Garner or Tamir Rice or Mike Brown or any of these folks? To the extent that they even do an investigation, which is even more than what Native people get, what missing and murdered Indigenous women get. But even when they do an investigation, it's a mock trial that results of it. So there is an 11-day protest that's happening, and Reggie, where is it happening in multiple places?
It's happening. Yes, it is happening in multiple places. One at the in Staten Island. There's one in front of One Police Plaza in Manhattan.
Okay.
But there are.
In front of the governor's, the city hall, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
or
happening
the
in
mayor's
multiple.
office. I'm sorry.
Right.
Mayor,
It's happening in multiple places.
All right. We got a little audio. King Downing went to one of these rallies, and he wanted to inquire about the folks that were there as it related to this day, Nelson Mandela Day. So we'll play this piece that King Downing is responsible for.
I'm David Galarza. I'm with the Justice Committee here in New York City.
And what's your reflection on Nelson Mandela?
Nelson Mandela, for me and for so many, he's just the ultimate freedom fighter, the ultimate seeker of truth and justice. And I'm here today with the family of Eric Garner and all these beautiful young people demanding justice and truth. Be told, for Eric Garner, his killers deserve to be locked up and put away for his murder. But I'm also here as a Puerto Rican because we're going through our own pains in Puerto Rico with a corrupt administration and vultures and hedge fund vultures and others that are preying on our situation as a colony. So we have our own sort of like Nelson Mandela in Puerto Rico by the name of Oscar Lopez Rivera. That was a long time coming in terms of prison. We got him out. We launched a struggle to get him out. And as we speak, he's in Puerto Rico still continuing the good fight for justice and for freedom for Puerto Rico. So I'm here as a Puerto Riqueño, and I'm here as somebody who knows that Black Lives Matter and will respect the movement to honor all lives, but especially Black lives and the people that are fighting and struggling in Puerto Rico for peace, justice, and freedom.
All right, I want to thank King for that great piece there from today's chapter of the Eric Garner story. And look, at this point, I think people have pretty much ruled out the idea that any of these officers are going to serve any time. Now they're just saying get them off the force. I mean, that's what the family's main thing is. Fire Pantaleo, fire the other. They won't even release the names of the other officers.
I went, okay. So did you, so with the Me Too movement now and people actually getting prosecuted and the whole narrative of what guilty is and moving past boys being boys and actually understanding that women's bodies are women's rights, do you think that can be compared to officers killing black kids, black people? Do you think that
You mean, can we flip the switch a little bit, create enough of an awareness where
that they
some
can be
finally
prosecuted? If we can do that for the Me Too movement, do you think it's possible that we can do this for a
Probably not
cop?
going backwards, but going forward, I mean, obviously one, again, the irony is just too thick, but the one officer who was prosecuted for a wrongful killing, happened to be a black officer.
Right.
He was an immigrant, no less, and he killed a white woman who was also an immigrant, by the way. But so there is a standard, and there's been, I think, Reg, you pulled a number up. I think there was something like 6 in the last decade.
It wasn't Reggie. It was the other guy I was covering.
Oh, you're right.
last time.
It was Ken. Yeah, Ken Galley pulled up, I think, or was it? Yeah, one of the other. You were out that day, but they were talking about how many prosecutions there actually were, and there's almost none. There's almost none, and of course I have to say, that if you look at the numbers of death by cop, proportionally, Native people are have the highest likelihood, proportionally now, of death by cop. Only in the 16 to 20 age group are Native people not the highest in terms of death by cop per 100,000 people, and that's and black people, black males surpass the Native number. Now, and I want to be clear, because I'm sure somebody's going to call. There's more white people killed by cop than anybody else. Yes, there are. It's because there are more white people, which kind of brings me back, and I got to bring it back a little bit to what we're talking about here, Nelson Mandela Day. There's one of the things that is incredible is when you understand that apartheid lasted for so long, and Mandela would be in prison for 27 years. 27 years. That's in a country where the white rule existed, where the white people were an extreme minority. The overwhelming majority of people in South Africa, in Africa in general, are black people. But even being in the majority, it took 27 years to get Mandela out of prison. Now you cross the pond here, and you realize that white people are in their control. There's systemic racism embedded in everything from the U.S. Constitution, from Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, right up to the sitting president and the the Supreme Court nominees, the Attorney General. There's racism embedded all the way through, and again, the immovable force is that white people are by a large margin, the majority. So when you hear people, want to deny whether Trump is saying something racist, it's primarily white people. Look, and it bothers me when I hear radio stations, NPR stations in particular, where they target. Let's find a black person who will agree with Trump, like somehow that's balance. I mean, that's like saying the climate change deniers, you got to give them equal time with the people who are concerned about climate change. So when you find a Republican Cuban, and you say, well, not all Hispanics think Trump is a racist, so you find some Republican Cuban in Florida, or you find some right wing Ben, whatever, what's his name, Ben.
Like D'Souza?
No,
Carson.
No. Carson.
Oh,
Carson,
Ben
yeah,
Carson.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Ben Carson. I mean, look, or you find
Dinesh D'Souza.
Dinesh D'Souza so a person of color or of some other background to carry water for Donald Trump. Those are the exception to the rules. They don't need Ben Carson, or D'Souza, because they have a huge body of white people. Some of them, are clearly white supremacists, and some just claim they aren't, and they'll actually sing the praises of somebody like Nelson Mandela today. Yeah, you're going to find plenty of white people who praise Nelson Mandela.
George Bush.
Well, there you go. Yeah. But at the same time, you're going to see in this country, white people are a solid majority. And I know people say, well, there's but there's a real concern because of the browning of America. Well, and what are they calculating? I think they're saying this kindergarten class, or last year's kindergarten class, was the first class where white people weren't the majority. If you looked at all the kindergarten classes, so that tells you, because in 12 years, when they're when they graduate, they'll be adults and that kind of stuff. But when you have to calculate at what calendar date, what year will white people no longer be the majority? It almost doesn't matter, folks, because even when they fall below 50%, they are still going to be the largest of the groups. I mean,
well, and it's not
black
even,
people are what, 13%?
More or less.
Yeah, 13 to 15%.
Yeah, it's
Hispanic, people who are labeled as Hispanic.
Because Latinos are supposed to be roughly about 60 million, and African Americans supposed to be about 50 to 55 million. So still.
But it doesn't even matter, because what it's going to come down to is the shade. So whether you're white or not, I mean, and this is reflected in every country in the world, the lighter shade of that country is the one who will hold that privilege and will likely hold that money and the economic power and that independence
even beyond that,
and that freedom.
The point that I'm trying to make with South Africa is, even when white people were in an extreme minority, they maintained control for a very, very long time.
I mean,
because it's systemic.
Everywhere they went.
Yeah.
That's always the case. I mean, that is what comes along with white people coming and taking over territories.
I always like that word "went." It's like, I wish they could be wenting the other way. I don't
But
know.
I do think, because even though I know you're talking about the browning in a sense of like false hope, and maybe this is just me being younger, and also because I have to believe in hope, otherwise it's impossible to do activism. But I mean, it feels like it's just going to have to swing eventually.
Well,
there's a limited amount of time for white supremacists and white people to have this much power, because women are taking up more space, trans people are taking up more space now more than ever. Queer communities, black and brown communities are taking up more space, and it's trendy, whether that's good or bad, but they're getting platforms, and we're moving. And like Indigenous women leading every movement that happens, Indigenous women are on the front lines there putting in this work. And I think eventually, like, we're just gonna have to swing the other way. That may be super naive, but I feel it's going to have to happen.
And I'm not trying to dash the hope. What I'm saying is,
No.
It's not the numbers. What I'm saying is the hard work still has to be done. Regardless,
Absolutely.
If white people fall below the majority, there's not something that's going to like just transform because you reach a magic number. That's the point that I'm trying to make. The reason I'm bringing up South Africa, not only because it's Nelson Mandela Day, but because it took 27 years, even when they were in the extreme minority, to have some equity in South Africa. So, and the point that I'm trying to make is that if you think we just have to wait it out, no, you have to work at this every single day. And as Native people, again, I got to give that number. We represent less than 0.7%. So we don't have the numbers. And frankly, that's why it's so important for us that we have black allies, and we have allies from white allies, and we have allies from across the board. Because if anybody thinks it's just a numbers game, it isn't. I mean, the reason I'm advocating for Peltier's release is because his trial was a sham, and Barack Obama said in his speech to at Mandela's funeral, if you don't have freedom for everyone, then you don't really have freedom for anyone, and that's a point that you can't. If you oppress the most vulnerable people, then it doesn't mean that everybody else is off scot-free.
So I think I'm going to play devil's advocate to myself here because where I do think, just said, I think we're going to swing that way. We're swinging in the way of like, trans rights, gay marriage. Like even from when I was a kid or you were a kid, like those weren't things we talked about, and mass incarceration. And now these are all being brought upon the table and really examined, and really like fundamental changes happening. But also like, well then the racism aspect specific to indigenous people or the erasure doesn't seem like hasn't budged much. But I do think maybe that's
the erasure more than anything, because I think as a Native person, it is really, really difficult for me to be optimistic that Native people are going to be able to maintain and continue to assert their distinction. I think there's some that will, but the propensity to assimilate and what is looked at as the advantages of assimilation. Like I said, and most of our territories, there are parents that are teaching their kids that their best hope for the future is to leave. That just the act of leaving your native community, your native territory, is a part of losing some of it. So it is hard. Yeah. I think there's always going to be, there's always going to be John Kanes and and John Trudells, and there's going to be people who are out there doing this kind of work. But every time we raise an issue, even the mascot issue, what's the first thing somebody says? Well, Native people don't oppose it. They want to try to play a numbers game. They'll find as many assimilated or people who or 1/32nd Cherokee from their grandmother who's the Cherokee princess and say, oh yeah, I think it's fine to have a Washington football team called the Redskins.
I think too, the only thing that I can make sense of in terms of like specific to indigeneity and why it's just different in our case is the relationship to acknowledgement and guilt and shame. And that's not just for white people. That's kind of across the board for anybody living in America, is the idea of acknowledging Native people and Native sovereignty and the concept of reparations and approaching that subject is so overwhelming for people to think about, because how much atrocity has actually happened, but what giving up freedom would look like. And that I imagine, feels different for like white people versus black people or any other group who's here, because, white people, like, there's no argument about what the relationship has been between white people and indigenous people. But for example, for like black folks and reparations, like, is that applicable to them in a Native way? Because like which I'm not saying, I'm not advocating that they're
subject, because Native people were enslaved at the same time black people were.
And I'm not advocating that like black people give natives reparation, but I'm just saying like it's a weird subject to broach, because when you've had to fight for so long to get freedom, and then everybody's still on native land, it gets really sticky and really complicated. And that's the only reason why I think the erasure of indigenous people has been vastly so successful, because it's so complicated and so much guilt and shame is wrapped up in it.
Last Saturday, there's a replica, and they've been doing this for a bunch of these ships, but there's a replica of the Santa Maria, one of Columbus's ships, that sailed up to St. Lawrence, actually was in Mohawk territory, went to across Lake Ontario, stopped in Rochester. The Native people had approached them there. But when they came to Buffalo, I was a part of a group that went. And here's my observation. It's a Spanish crew. They really did come from Spain, this crew. And they're proud of their town that they're from, because it had some role in a historic role in creating ships like this, including the original. And they're clueless. So if you go on that ship, it's set up like a museum inside. There's nothing on the Santa Maria that suggests we ever existed. It talks about Columbus, the crew, the ship, discovering a vacant land. We're not even mentioned.
That's why.
And then when you have the conversation with them, even them, They're offended. And you know what? It wasn't just them. There was a line of white people paying to go onto that ship to walk around. And, you know, and as flyers were being handed out, I said, no, I don't need to read that stuff. I know all I want to know. That's what the white people said. And one man says to his daughter or granddaughter, don't pay any attention to them. Those are just idiots. They're just protesters.
Yeah.
And so, so you don't even want to know. I mean, ignorance is one thing.
It's not
Willful ignorance is another thing.
Also, like, subhuman.
Yeah.
And like, I fancy style dance, traditional dancing, at like a museum for like some like Manhattan Kids Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing it, this like really old white woman came up to her granddaughter and she was like, look, that's an Indian. You should get your picture with that. An Indian. And I was just like,
not she.
Not she. Why? Why?
That thing there dancing. That thing dancing there.
And then she
an
was like,
Indian.
so where do you come from? And I was like, oh, you know, Mohawk. And she's like, okay, but where did the Mohawks live? And I was like, New York. And she's like, okay, but where did they move from? And I'm like, what? I was just like, the idea of like just no concept at all of any of the indigenous people who live in New York, the history here, the fact that we didn't come from anywhere. Like, where did you come from?
Yeah, it's like that classic thing where a white person says to somebody of color, "Where are you from?"
No, but where are you
30
really
seconds,
from?
42nd Street. I don't know. No. You know what I mean. No, I don't know what you mean.
Right.
You know, and these are white people whose ancestors didn't come from here,
Which is
kind of just the absurdity of the whole thing.
Yeah.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. We'll take a break. We'll go out with another Murray song, and when we come back, we're going to go to your call. So if you don't know the number, it's 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. I look forward to you guys responding. I'd love to hear more about your view on International Nelson Mandela Day and any thoughts you might have on his experience, on what he represented, and what the work that's left to do. We'll talk about that when we come back. This is
Good
John
luck.
Kane with Shawnee Rice. Oh, no, you're leaving, huh?
I'm leaving, yeah.
All right, Shawnee's going to leave. I'm on my own. Man, I set myself up for
For the 2-hour
another
one.
drudging here. All right, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. We'll go to break, and then it'll be just me and you.
I'll get you some water.
We'll be back after this. Thanks.
Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Seems like nobody cares, nobody knows. Well, mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, we've all lost someone. I thought every life mattered, each and every truth.
You're tuned to listener-sponsored non-commercial Pacifica Radio. This is WBAI New York on Mandela Day.
For me, it's mean a lot of things because he tried to demonstrate that black people and white people have the same right. And he tried to teach his people that they need to go forward, they don't stay in the position that the people put in, that they don't have no value. They have value just like whatever person is, but the people convince the minds for a lot of people before that because you are poor, you got to be poor all your life, and this is not true either. And because you are black, you don't have the rights that the white people have, and this is not right too. So for me, that's why I say he is important because he teach the people that they have the same right as everybody.
And this is listener-sponsored WBAI New York.
All right, thanks for coming back. We're going to go right to your calls, and I appreciate that caller offering her thoughts on Mandela Day, and that's kind of the topic here. But of course, we can swing a little wide with this thing and talk about where we see the battle for equality, where we see the battle against racism, because at the end of the day, that is what Mandela was fighting. He was fighting racism. Yeah, it was apartheid. That's all tied to the same thing. So I know that I get some interesting calls every time I talk about racism, especially when I offer a legitimate explanation on what racism is. That it is not just racial bias. It's not just liking or disliking somebody who's different. It's the idea of asserting power and authority and looking at yourself as superior to all others just based on your perception of race. So I think it's important that people realize that when you're talking about racism, it is a white thing. And I know that lights everybody up, but I can't emphasize it enough. If you don't agree with it, you don't agree with it, but you just don't agree with the definition of racism, and that's the bottom line. All right, let's go to caller. I guess I better put some headphones on if I'm going to listen to what the caller's got to say. All right, caller, you're up first. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Yes, greetings to the beloved family. This is Matt in the cave.
All right, thanks for calling.
I first want to reflect on Mandela Day. I think it's very important, and I thought it was also very enlightening to be refreshed about the history, which very much still continues. I think you made an excellent point about even when so-called whites, because we know it's a created status code identity, right? Even when they become a minority, they have these institutions so locked down and in place. And a couple things. I want to say one of the most important things Mandela said to us was that when you want to understand the society, look at their prison system. I noticed that and I have some information on Eric Gardner. I noticed last night, listen to the news, what's her name? Roger Stone, one of the guys in Trump's criminal troupe, is even after saying he wanted to hang Brennan, he put the judge in the crosshairs, he's already had 3 strikes out in terms of not following the order. He had his wife post on Instagram. It's because even a decent judge will realize that the whole prison system was designed for a certain population. So when one of their guys does something like Jeffrey Epstein, something heinous, they can't see putting them into what they designed there's hell on earth. But let me go to Eric Gardner, because some of the most important news we get is when the callers call in. And about a few years ago, and there used to be a lot more call-ins, but one sister called in, and she had talked to Eric's father. And his father said what was going on was that Eric had made a complaint, I think, if I remember correctly, to the Internal Affairs, and that's probably sealed his death certificate, because Um, when this guy Pantaleo, and why the others involved weren't also charged. Well, nobody was actually charged. But it just goes to show. Oh, and one more thing. You mentioned about the cigarettes. Well, according to one of the daughters who called in, no cigarettes were returned to her in terms of his personal effects. One of the things we don't ask ourselves is how someone who's a middle-aged person is in a position for something that most would be a summons. How is it that he's assumed to be ripe for Rikers Island? That makes no sense. It's never questioned. And we have to start from square one in terms of our self-determination about police, because every aspect of it is so corrupt that after Eric died, this came out in the CCRB administrative hearing, after he died, what's his name, Pantaleo decided to charge him to just make up that he has so many 40,000 or so many tens of thousands of carton of cigarettes that he just made up so he could write him up on a penalty, on a felony. And that really happened.
All right. Well, I want to get a chance to address some of this. I had understood the same thing, and I mentioned it earlier that that Eric Garner had money seized from him through their very loose civil forfeiture rules that they have, which really entitles a police officer to take any kinds, all kinds of property, including cash, and to get that money back is difficult. And from what I understood, that Eric Garner had filed a complaint about money that was taken from him, and that they seize money, and then they put it on you to prove that you legitimately had the money. They don't have to prove that you got it through that these are ill-gotten gains. That's not the way civil forfeiture works. And so you're right. I mean, that's part of the reason that Eric Garner was put in the crosshairs. And I think that's something that I think people do have to note. But again, I have seen nothing to suggest that in their attempt to in Pantaleo's claim that he was simply going there to arrest him, there's nothing to suggest that they had any substance to arrest him for. That there were no cigarettes confiscated. There was no cash confiscated, nothing here. They simply, I mean, he took it upon himself to initiate the conflict, and again, choked him to death. So anyway, I wanted to. All right, let's move on. I do hope that we can get a lot of this subject matter covered, especially relating to Nelson Mandela Day, and again some of the battles that are left. I mean, certainly Eric Garner and the death by cop is an issue that we need to address. The other thing I want to mention is the phrase that I understand is that you need to judge a society by its most vulnerable people, not the ones who are affluent, not the ones who are who are going to be taken care of, not the white people who can get away with rape, but how do you treat the most oppressed, the most vulnerable? And I think that's the measure of a society. So that's the quote that I'm familiar with. All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, John. This is Arnold calling from Peekskill, New York.
Hi, Arnold. Thanks for calling again.
Yeah. In regard to Mandela, he truly was a visionary. Unfortunately, just before he got elected, he made a deal with the white minority, as well as multinational corporations, as well as the IMF and World Bank, that they would, once he became president, he would not nationalize South African industry. And also, he betrayed the African majority he didn't enforce the Freedom Charter.
I got to say that I'm not so familiar with that.
That was one of the ANC. Just I think before Mandela was arrested, they initiated part of their platform was the Freedom Charter, that for all South Africans, regardless if they're indigenous African or white or South or Asia, because remember, and also you have quote unquote colored people of mixed background.
Mm-hmm.
as well as people from India, the ones that came at the time when Gandhi was there in South Africa in the late 19th and early 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, and that all of the folks who were not originally South African looked at their lives as very vulnerable after apartheid ended, because there were plenty of people, white people, and again many people from India and other countries that had taken advantage of the fact that they could acquire land cheaply, and they could take over land by means that are certainly suspect. And that's why we continuously see these posts. Some of them are false, but this idea that white people are getting booted off of lands that they farmed for 50 years, 50 years,
and they haven't found justice in regards to land. The African majority. Post-apartheid South Africa, and also the present president, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a labor organizer, is now a billionaire in South Africa. So, and also there was a massacre of miners at a place called Marikana, and outside of Johannesburg.
Well, and I think it's you have to acknowledge that that these systems are not easily broken, and even especially when you're talking about a peaceful transfer of power. I mean, it's very difficult to unwind these systems of oppression. These especially because they were based so much on a minority having control. So and again, I'm not making an excuse for not making tough decisions. I mean, but this. The compromise here was about a peaceful transition of power and a peaceful transition versus a revolution. And we can look at this, and there's no question that Mandela represented. He was a revolutionary, and while I won't condemn his work, there's his accomplishments. Nobody can suggest that it's all that the fight is over, and frankly, it shouldn't have been on Mandela as a singular figure. And although I'll give him credit as a singular figure, we have to maintain accountability to all those people who seek to a seat at these tables, these positions of power. And so again, why part of what I wanted to do here on the show was to play Obama's comments. I just want people to again try to empathize with somebody who listens to that speech and realizes that he's deflecting. Again, he can talk about how he and Michelle are beneficiaries of a change in some of the some things in the United States, but he was never. He was always came from a place of means, and so he's not the same as somebody whose parents and generation after generation are literally come from slavery. That's not Barack Obama.
Right.
So, but Arnold, I appreciate the call. And look, and we do need to have a fair criticism to especially those, if you're going to praise somebody, you've got to be able to criticize them at the same time. And obviously, it's really easy for people to look at South Africa now and say, "Wow, they sure fixed that, didn't they?" And condemn the problems that exist there. But again, peaceful transitions of power, power that was corrupt from the start. Look, there's always going to be those people who, once they get in those seats of power, say, "This is pretty good. I like this. I kind of like the way this feels." And and that's not the same as and even when there is a revolution, the same thing can happen. You can still have a revolution that turns you into another system of corruption. So again, I appreciate the call. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi there. I'm Elle from Long Island.
Hey, Elle. Thanks for calling.
All right, and I want to thank you for such a wonderful program, and I want to go straight to the target. I listened to Obama's speech. I heard some of the speech prior to you playing, And when I heard it first, I got a little upset to the point where I had to turn and listen to something else, okay? Because his speech only confirmed in my mind what I thought of his position in world politics. I have a term that I use. People who compromise, people who do things for their advantage, people who call themselves great politicians and end up being the puppet normally have to sacrifice greatly to a point where they know that if they don't play the game, then they will be eliminated. Now, that's just my little personal observation of said people, gamers.
Mm-hmm.
Obama was selected for president. He got the Peace Award for what? I don't know.
Yeah, just by virtue of being the first black president, I think. Yeah, I don't. That's not clear.
There is some information out on his bloodline, on his family, on his mother, grandmother, and all of that. Okay? But my point is this. If one looks at going back when Obama had to do the presidential walk, you know, when they walked to the White House for the inauguration ball or something, it was extremely cold. When he first went into office, someone brought something to my attention. And they said, look for it, because Bush has done it. Who other? Reagan did it. Even Clinton did it. And I looked at Obama, and he did it in that walk to the White House where it was so cold, and he had his coat open, and he was walking, and then there came a time when he had to, I guess, get in the car to warm up a little bit, and then when they came to the grandstand, his family, his children, they were waving to the public, and he did something. All I'm going to suggest is, folks, look at various newsreel of presidents in their waving. Look at their hands. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Oh man, you're going to leave me hanging here?
Okay. I will say this: you are on point. Okay, it's an insult to the people in this country who have struggled over years, to the people who have died on what Obama did. Now you may ask, well, why? Why would he do such a thing? Because he is preparing. Okay, there are bases all over. There is havoc in the continent of Africa, countries fighting countries, Ebola and all types of germ warfare, where people who have lived centuries, who've had wives, and they've never had any type of said disease, okay? But all of a sudden now, you get a whole lot of this and that.
Yeah, and it's ironic that there's they will try to associate that these diseases are starting in Africa.
Listen, the latest thing is the swine. It's the African swine disease that kills pigs that is in China. Now, the pigs in China are dying from African swine disease. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. Now, this was broadcast on news in this country. So every disease and every type of malady that we may suffer starts in Africa.
Yeah, unless you look
But
at real
yet,
history and you realize the plagues of Europe caused by the filthy conditions and that kind of stuff. It is pretty remarkable. Look, I want to thank you so much. I am going to look for the wave. I want to find out kind of what you're suggesting here. I appreciate the call, and you always provide something new for us to look at. So I certainly appreciate it. Do we got another call in line? All right. Well, again, the number is 212-209-2877. I do want to remind people that we are entering fund drive. This is kind of like a soft beginning here. We're using this day to promote WBAI and our commitment to things like Mandela Day. I'm not going to be here next week, so I do want to remind people that I do solicit support for my show and for the station. And when I say for my show, it's not for me personally. Look, I'm not a paid producer. I make the trip from Seneca Territory. I take an 8-hour train ride to come here every week to do a show, so I can offer a perspective that I suspect you're not going to get anywhere else. And it isn't a perspective that I expect you to totally agree with. And in fact, you callers oftentimes make it clear that you don't agree with the perspective. But for me, it's an opportunity to say, to assert that I am different, that I do come from a different place. And so when I come from a native territory, one that I not only come from, that I'm going to turn around, I'm going to go back home to after I do this program, I offer a different perspective on the issues that we're all confronted with. And that's kind of why I wanted people to listen to Barack Obama speak, and try to listen to it as if you were a native person and hearing some of those words. And so that's what I suggest. But I do that this each week because I'm given the opportunity. That opportunity is secured by you, the listener. So if you make a donation to WBAI, please do make a donation in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane. Let them know that you listen to the program, that you appreciate the program, and you appreciate the conversation, even if you don't necessarily like the perspective that I'm offering. Know that it exists, and that because it's a talkback show, because we have a talkback show, you have an opportunity to either confront my opinion or agree with it or expand it. And that's what we do here. So again, I ask you to go to the pledge line, go to 516-620-3602. You can do this anytime, not just when we're in fund drive. Again, 516-620-3602. Make a donation of any size, become a BAI buddy, and do that in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane. I greatly appreciate it. The station appreciates it, and it sends a signal to the station itself, and it sends a signal back to me that there are. Look, I get you guys to call in and you offer your perspective, and that shows the level of support. I'm asking for another level of support, and that's financial support. So please do make a donation. Again, 516-620-3602, or you can go to the website www.give2WBAI.org, and you can make a donation there. All right, we're just about the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll come back to more of your calls. Again, the number is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to weigh in on International Nelson Mandela Day and some of the commentary that I offered in response to it. We'll be right back.
Seems so calm to me. Loving the water, it comes so naturally. It's a gift from my mother, can't deny. The day we lose it is the day, that's the day we die. Senseless death that should have never been. No more senseless death, drinking water that's not clean. It should be right for all humanity to partly water. Greed. souls to the very last drop.
All right, that's Murray Porter in the Water. Hey, the song we went out with on the top of the hour was about Highway 16. That's about missing and murdered Indigenous women. These are all from his stand-up CD. This is a CD that I offered as a premium, by the way, in the last fund drive. We have more, and if you're interested, you can probably look at on the Give to WBAI .org page, and you can find it in the product index. Look for Murray Porter stand up, and you can still pick up that premium. We still have them, and we'd love to get some in your hands. So again, I got to remind people that we are entering fund drive mode. So even though I won't be here I won't be here next week. I'm sorry. You can make a donation to the station in the name of this program anytime. You don't have to wait till I'm on the air. You can do it anytime if you make a note that it's for Let's Talk with John Kane. If you become a WBAI buddy in the name of this program, it'd be greatly appreciated. All right. Let me see. Anything else I really wanted to get to before jumping on? I guess not. We'll go right to the callers. All right. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Lejla, and I'm calling from New York in the Bronx.
All right. Well, thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks. This is my first time calling, but I listened to you for a while. So, in the context, this may seem a little off topic, but I think that it is pertinent. In the context of Nelson Mandela International Day, I was just going to, in the comments also that the president has made recently about those 4 congresswomen going back where they came from, I was just going to say, since you were talking about, global, white supremacy and them being such a minority and ruling South Africa for all of those decades and almost century, why is it that everybody is so excited about, the marriage of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry? Because, they're saying, okay, she's the first, biracial person or whatever to marry into the monarchy. But doesn't that, what is it that we're really supposed to be celebrating about that? Because doesn't that monarchy still represent some of the very things that we're saying that, okay, well, Nelson Mandela helped to get rid of, and some of these other people like Fidel Castro and, Yasser Arafat and whatever, and Hugo Chavez. People are still all over the world trying to gain independence from these ex- or post-colonial, countries, and they still really don't have control over their resources. If you look at what the IMF is doing and the World Bank and these structural adjustment programs, and, they're still struggling. And as a matter of fact, England, they used to say that the sun never set on the British Empire because their empire was so vast. They owned, 80% of the Earth's surface at one time just with colonies. So, and they still have some of those countries that, were celebrating or that I saw, greeting him. They're still part of the Commonwealth. They have some kind of, Britain still has some kind of authority there. They're still part of the Commonwealth and not totally independent. And even the ones that are, they're still not really functioning the way they should. So, exactly what are we celebrating with that? And then you on this side of the Atlantic, okay, you have the U.S. that prides itself on being someplace where you can be self-made, and, they broke away from the tyranny of King George or whatever, and, so you can be self-made here and no more kings. And then on this side of the Atlantic, you have somebody telling people to go back where they came from. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, which are really their cousins, and they say, okay, they recognize them as their source, for the Bill of Rights and all this stuff. They think it comes from English law, English common law with the Magna Carta. Then they have over there where people say, oh, look, he married this lady that's a divorcee, and she's American, and blah, blah, blah. I'm just wondering, what is this we're supposed to be celebrating with that?
Well, I got to tell you, I don't understand why Americans in particular are so enamored with royal family and the whole British monarchy thing in the first place. It is bizarre, regardless of whether a mixed blood African American person marries into the family. I agree that part of it's downright disturbing. I don't understand. Even and this even gets into what schools were teaching in the United States as they were adopting the Common Core learning system, which basically came from England, I might add. Part of what they were teaching children about the royal family. Most people don't even understand their American history. For one thing, what is taught is incorrect, and frankly, even what is taught is not retained. So people don't understand about how the system of government works here. But again, I don't know if this is all this whole little girl princess thing that people become enamored with. It is pretty incredible because the monarchy does represent so much of the ills of colonialism. That's who was responsible for it. And yeah, so no, I don't get it at all. And of course, as a Native person, well, I won't condemn a Native person marrying a non-Native person. I do. You can't help but accept the fact that as the cultures collide, and even if it's a soft collision, there's something that gets lost, especially not by the dominant culture, but by the culture that is oppressed. So it's not. I can guarantee there isn't going to be a whole lot of black culture that makes its way into the monarchy just because of Meghan Markle marrying into that family. So it'll be just the opposite. It'll be just another person of color or a mixed person of color who will lose more of that distinction. So I agree with you completely. I appreciate the call. It's a great observation. I appreciate it. All right. We'll go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Paul from Manhattan.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for calling.
So I think sometimes it's easy to forget perhaps one of Mandela's greatest characteristics because it was his mistake. And his mistake, which he later was very clear about, that it was the greatest mistake that he made, is when he was running, he knew perfectly well that what AIDS was going to do, what the HIV AIDS could do. He didn't know the scope of it. Nobody knew the scope of it, but he knew it was a problem, and he made a political decision. And his decision was that the election, the overthrowing of apartheid, was so important and so fundamentally necessary that there was this health crisis that if he was really open and talked about it, it could cause divisions in the ANC. It could weaken his election. He made that political decision. But the difference between him and almost any leader that I could think of is that after he was out of office, after the AIDS epidemic became so horrendous, that he admitted it. He said, this was the worst mistake I made in my life, actually, and actively worked to help and, was part of the campaign, despite people in the ANC, some of the leaders in the ANC kept going, the mythologies. He didn't do that. He never denied that AIDS was real. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to, because we are great heroes, we only like to talk about the great things that they did. But in this case, I think it's a really great thing to be wrong, to make a decision, and when he had to make the decision, he made the decision. He said it was the worst. That's a great attribute. And the other thought about that is that an earlier caller said, there's this. What is this about swine flu and these diseases? Suddenly they're African diseases, and it is very easy to believe that pharmaceutical companies and even security agencies from other countries could be responsible. But think about it in another way, that life begins in Africa. The whole human race comes out of Africa. Africa is the most the richest, most fecund
most
place
fertile,
in
most
the
fertile
whole planet,
Yeah, yeah.
and the fact that diseases come from there is not necessarily a conspiracy. It's really, that's where life is the most richest.
Well,
and I think
while I agree with what you're saying in part, the problem is how it gets characterized, and when people start attributing disease in general with a place, it just becomes another way of condemning the people that come from that place. I mean, I don't need to repeat exactly how Trump described some of those countries, but the second part of it was whole, so we'll just leave it at that. But this is, but that's the problem. While I agree with you, it is perfectly reasonable to think that a place as fertile for life as Africa could also be fertile for mutations in life, and including disease and that kind of stuff. Let's not forget that there were clearly plagues that affected Europe over and over again because of the living conditions that they created there, and not because it was the most fertile place, but because of what they because it was a petri dish of filth. So no, you make some good points. And as far as the compromise thing, look, I agree that that there were many mistakes made in how to deal with AIDS when it first became known, and whether Mandela had to make a compromise like that is that's tough, and to admit and to acknowledge that such a compromise was made because AIDS had become such a divisive topic. If it was just a disease that didn't get associated with finger pointing and with condemning everything from from lifestyle choices, not just gay lifestyle choices, but the unprotected sex and and all of that stuff. That's why it was such a tough conversation to have. But if he made the calculation to get in a position of power so he could affect change, well, I think he did. So it's hard to condemn him for that, even if it was a calculation that obviously had some serious consequences with it. So I'll just leave that at there. All right, we got another caller on the line. Yeah, we got another one coming up here. All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Brooklyn. I'm gonna try to limit my conversation, because I know I have other people on the line and they have opinions too, and they want to express their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm short, but yeah, okay. From Brooklyn. New York from Brooklyn. Sorry about that. New York from Brooklyn. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a comment though?
Oh yes, I do. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, okay. My comment would be, okay. Trump talked about the immigrants, and he talked about how people from Mexico, they're rapists and murderers. My point is that during history, going back centuries, when the Europeans came here, right? They slaughtered and massacred indigenous people. A lot of them wasn't nice people either.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of thieves, murderers, rapists.
No, and in fact, I addressed this as I was mentioning. I visited a site where they docked a replica of the Santa Maria, and the point that I was trying to make to some of their crew members and those that would listen, and including a film crew that was recording, is that if you look at the writings of Columbus and his men, including some of the church folks, the bishops and the people representing the Vatican that traveled the church with them, they documented the atrocities, the rape culture that came with those men, the venereal disease that caused some of the. Everybody likes to suggest that Native people weren't really killed; they just died on their own because they caught diseases from Europeans. Yeah, some of those diseases were rape associated diseases. They weren't. It wasn't just catching a runny nose. It wasn't just smallpox and influenza. Venereal disease played a big part. And again, Native people who had had no familiarity and no resistance to those kinds of diseases didn't just get sick, they died. And so when you look at the not just the rape and the murder, the disfigurement that Columbus imposed upon people for not paying him tributes, as he called it, for not collecting gold and turning it over to him. There were people that had their hands cut off, their limbs cut off, their faces were disfigured, their ears or their nose. He executed people. He did it within some sort of church ritualistic, creepy way in terms of executing, crucifying and burning or hanging people in numbers of 13 at a time, so it would represent the 12 apostles and Jesus. This is the kind of stuff that they did. They brought attack dogs with them, and those attack dogs, they would feed the babies of these native people to those attack dogs. It got to the point where women were literally drowning their babies before the Spanish would come there, before the Spanish would take their live babies, because they were feeding live babies to their dogs. And out of compassion, these mothers would drown their babies first. That's what they would do. So I mean, and how do we know this? We know this because they wrote this stuff down. And so, when we protest a Columbus statue or a Columbus Day or whatever else, that's why I think it's important that people understand that, and some of that bias, and that willful ignorance that continues, that perpetuates the racism and the hate that guys like Donald Trump perpetuate. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, one more thing I want to make too. I watch Gary Note sometimes and listen to some of the things that he says. And he brings up topics about going back centuries when in Europe, people didn't bathe and they treated each other unfairly. They kill each other. They abuse each other. And when I talk to people, I tell them Dark Ages. Remember the Dark Ages, going back centuries? I know this is Europeans. I want to say white people. Well, I want to say white Europeans treated their own. They mistreat their own people like that. And here's another thing. Europeans eat each other. They used to eat each other. Years going back centuries, they used to eat each other and massacre and kill each other.
Well, there's evidence in Jamestown, colonial Jamestown, that they found evidence that when they were starving, they ate some of their own people. This was the British colony, Jamestown in Virginia. So yeah, no, and you make a good point. I mean, and it goes back to LaShayla's call, because the monarchy is what created this hierarchy where people could be mistreated that way. Before they could pick on somebody that was different by race, they created their own hierarchy. Who was royal and who wasn't royal, and who were the serf, and who were the folks that were bound into servitude. That existed within Europe before they could simplify it for themselves by saying, okay, now we're gonna separate people by color, not just by what we've already predetermined. And then use the church to do it, predetermine what somebody's station in life is. Look, I want to thank you very much for the call. I sure do appreciate it. It was an excellent response. I do want to talk a little bit. We're pretty much ready to go here. Running out of time. I appreciate getting the extra hour today. I want to thank Linda Perry for giving me the opportunity to use International Nelson Mandela Day to highlight some of the inequities that still exist. I appreciate the callers to even bring both praise and criticism to Nelson Mandela. I don't think that he would have had it any other way, personally. But I want to remind people we are going into a fund drive, so I want to suggest that people go to the pledge line, go to the 516-620-3602, make a pledge of any size. The bigger the better, as far as I'm concerned. But make a pledge of any size. You don't have to wait till we enter a fund drive to do it. You can make a pledge anytime on that number, or go to our website, which is WBAI.org, and there you can make a contribution. You can even find out how to make a donation via text. You can do it online. You can find the numbers for reaching the pledge line there as well. And by all means, make a mention that you're donating in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane, and we greatly appreciate it. All right, we're just about out of time, but maybe I see the phone just lit up one last time. We'll grab one last caller before we go. Caller, you're up next, and you're up last. So what's your name? Where are you calling from?
All right. Mario, I'm in Manhattan right
Hey,
now.
Mario, thanks for calling.
All right. I was catching your show in and out. I was in. Here's something maybe you can cover in your show. It's an idea I had that I never heard anybody cover on BAI. What is the thing or the demographics or how the choice is made that a person identifies as a person of color? Because I'm Southern Italian, and there's definitely, if you go back enough, there's a mix.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't identify as that. But then there's other people, I know an Argentinian who are as white as I am, but then they identify because there was a relative who was black 1 or 2 decades back or a generation back. So what is it that sets a person up where they pick black or white?
Well,
I think my quick opinion is economics.
Well, the brief and short answer is that in America, there was a thing called a one-drop rule. If anybody could determine that somebody even had a trace amount of African American or African in them, they were considered black. I mean, even Native people. There were states in the southern states in particular, they wouldn't allow Native people to identify as Native people anymore. In fact, they said you were either white or you're black, and if so, you actually had through policy, sometimes at the state level, sometimes at the federal level, to determine that that racial characteristic. So sometimes it was imposed, but the bottom line is with identity is what you choose, and that choice is not bound by race, and it isn't necessarily even bound completely by ethnicity. It should be more bound by culture, by the life that you live, not by some by the physical attributes. And I think that's probably someplace that people have to rethink.
Do I have time to say something?
Yeah, go ahead, real quick.
All right. I basically, if it makes any sense, identify as a human being.
Yeah, there you go.
And to me, yeah. So we're in a fishbowl, and so whatever happens, happens. And this is my situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned. There's some people take exception. What do you mean you don't identify as a color? I just don't.
Well, and the reality is, in the United States,
it's a slippery slope.
The United States doesn't have a distinct culture, and because it is a country that, by and large, was established by wiping out the existing culture here, and then either dragging Africans in as slaves or people migrating for, it's funny, doing the exact thing that Donald Trump is saying. If you don't like the country, then leave it. Well, that's exactly what people did in Europe. And that's how it ended up being a predominantly white country, because of the influx of people who were escaping living conditions that they didn't want to be a part of anymore. But again, identity, we get pushed into a lot of these categories, whether it's right and left politically, whether it's north and south geographically, whether it's obviously there's some things that are clear in terms of gender, and even some of that can be less clear, I guess. But skin color was a convenient way to persecute people, and I think that's one of the things I do mention oftentimes is when you look at certain peoples who were also condemned as immigrants, whether it's Irish or Italian or Jewish people, the difference is that they were able to transcend that, and I'm not saying it as an individual accomplishment, but eventually they became accepted as white people. Irish were white enough, so and so there was no longer the barrier that would separate them. So, and the same thing with Italians, either Northern Italians or Southern Italians, in spite of skin complexion, they were considered white people, and not necessarily by individual choice, but just by the greater society. And of course, there was benefits with that, and that's where the white privilege comes in. Look, I want to thank everybody for accommodating me for the special 2-hour broadcast. It's been a privilege and an honor to do it. I want to give my thoughts out there, and give my praise to Nelson Mandela as well. And we won't be back on next week, but we'll keep you informed as when our next show comes up. This is John Kane with Let's Talk, and for Shawnee Rice, I'll say thank you, and we'll see you soon. Yahweh.
Talk to somebody. Let them know. Talk to your friend.